you guys for coming out. I'm just going to introduce the panel here. As you know, IBM has had a long-standing history with sports and technology. From the Wimbledon to US Open, IBM has been influencing and changing the game for many, many years. So the panel discussion today is going to focus on the conversion of sports to technology and how technology is really enhancing smarter stadiums, player performance, and engaging tech-savvy fans to allow them to have a better user experience. So I'm going to go ahead and allow the panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Bob here.
Hi, I'm Robert Roble. I have a startup, InterConnect. Been in the industry for 25 years, and I blog and tweets and Instagram about all things sports technology.
And I'm John Short. I'm a global business development and sales executive for our sports enterprise practice.
Russell Scabetti. I'm Vice President of Product Strategy with the company Core Software. We specialize in CRM and data warehousing software for sports teams and leagues. I also run a blog called thebusinessofsports.com, and then before that, I worked with the New York Jets for several seasons, the Philadelphia Flyers, and Arizona State University.
Great. So I'm going to get it started here, and this is certainly an interactive session. So feel free to comment, ask questions as we're going along here. But with all the social media that's taking place and all the content that's being produced, at this event and other events, it's no different in a sports venue. And so, one of the things that we're thinking about and seeing is a lot of content being produced by fans themselves at different sports venues. Whether that's selfies or even self-broadcasting. So I wanted to ask Russ, maybe start with you. What opportunities do you think presents the sports enterprises with all this content production being done by the fans?
Content production is huge. Fans, everything is about the shared experience, right? So if you're in a venue, one of the things that's been coming out of the research and a lot of the analysis of the data being generated by venues is it's almost equal about, or even more so, about content uploading than content downloading. Everyone wants to be able to share that selfie, share that picture with people that may or may not be in the venue with them. Venues only hold anywhere from 20 to 70,000 people for one particular event. And so it's a huge opportunity for fan engagement. People want to be a part of that collective experience, memorialize that experience to share in the future. And so it creates a connectedness that is key to bringing people back into the building. It's also key to competing with the at-home experience. So there's an expectation in the buildings to be able to do everything that they would normally be able to do when they're at home. So if you're tweeting about the game when you're at home, you better be able to tweet about the game while you're physically in the venue. And then for the properties and venues themselves, there's a monetization opportunity. So the more people can create their own content, the more people will engage with that content, and that content has an inherent value to it. So when you're sponsorship sales or general partnership marketing, you want to make sure that you can leverage that unique content, be able to tie it into the appropriate partners, and use that as a platform to generate revenue.
Thanks, Russ. So with all this content being produced, Bob, how can clubs use this content on a global level outside of their own venue and locality to engage with fans around the world?
Sure. There are a number of ways I would recommend teams and organizations to connect with the fans. There's HD giant screens that are showing up in the parking lots. There's the periscope, the live videos you mentioned earlier. And one of my favorites is gamification. I don't know if you've used the IBM event app. It has a gamification application that gives you rewards. And I think that's a tremendous way to merchandise, create brand awareness, and connect to fans.
Great. I mean, even we're seeing now the ability for fans around the world to be able to tweet into the stadiums themselves and come up on the signage in the venues. So another trend that we're seeing, and this just was recently announced, where Yahoo was going to be broadcasting an NFL game. So how do you see that changing the landscape of broadcasting?
I mean, there's a whole general trend in terms of how sports properties are managing the whole cord cutting process. There's more interest in your consumers viewing streaming content rather than relying on TV as the delivery for the at-home experience. The benefit for sports properties is I feel there's a lot more value being on the content side of that than the distribution side, because the distribution is changing so rapidly. And in particular, then Yahoo is one thing. Yahoo is more like a traditional rights model where whether it's Yahoo or YouTube, someone's paying the leagues, the teams for the rights for that broadcast and is going to monetize it through advertising or other ancillary business. But Periscope is interesting because Periscope disrupts that model a lot. And that's an interesting challenge that sports properties have. You know, where's the line? Whether it was the World Cup a couple years ago that was trying to block replay videos of goals because they didn't want to detract from the media rights value. We have plenty of teams that are trying to block Periscope in the building because it potentially represents a conflict with those media rights deals with Fox and NBC and ESPN that are for billions of dollars. So at the same time, those things encourage people to watch more content. There's studies that show if you're watching a Periscope feed at an event, there's a more than likely chance you'll actually go back and watch the replays or through a traditional means later on. So teams are trying to figure out what that balance is, how much do we allow, and how much actually presents a conflict.
Great. So without the content then being produced, the fans are really engaging with not only the venue itself but outside the venue. Now, how is this going to ultimately help the clubs generate more revenue for the teams?
Well, I think one way is to connect with the millennial crowd, the fans that sort of expect this technology. So, as we talked a little bit earlier about the UFC fight with Ronda Rousey, Periscope is in there and shutting down feeds, but they need to probably come up with some kind of a blend allowing video streaming and selfies and revenue generating opportunities.
So certainly the venue itself will require a very robust connectivity infrastructure, and a lot of these venues now are becoming mixed-use properties with having hotels and restaurants and shopping areas around these venues. So the infrastructure that's required to support all that will need to be very stable and robust. And today, some venues are there and some aren't. So how do you see the technology in the future, meeting that challenge for that pervasive connectivity?
I mean, at this point, I briefly mentioned earlier, fans expect to be able to do anything that they'd be able to do at home when they're in the venue. And so that requires, like we said, tremendous infrastructure. Not only infrastructure for the moment, the challenge is the infrastructure for what's happening 1 year from now, 2 years from now. We went through a boom in the last 10 years of new facilities being opened up. And if you look at those facilities, they're already going back and reinvesting tens of millions of additional dollars to rebuild infrastructure that was supposed to be, quote, future-proofed just because everything is expanding at such a dramatic rate. It's a requirement. It's a requirement to connect with millennials, to have that type of infrastructure in place. It's for the fan experience. It's also a huge requirement for the operational experience, whether it's security, whether it's access control, whether it's the HD screens and distributing content throughout the buildings. There's these huge video on demand systems that the stadiums are managing for your suites, for your food and beverage and merchandise menu boards, through your LED ribbon signage. And so you need to think about not just what you can do today, but do the best you can to plan for how things are changing and try to build in flexibility to support that, whether that is through use of cloud infrastructure or hybrid infrastructure or things that give you the potential to scale rather than thinking about just what I need to accomplish for the game on Sunday.
Thanks. So speaking of infrastructure and connectivity, as the fans and guests are going throughout the venue, there's a lot of new technologies around wayfinding and location-based solutions. How do you see the opportunities evolving for the clubs and the teams in that perspective?
Sure. I think one of them is beacon technology, identifies the end user, creates some data on a fan profile, if you will, and from that, we have opportunities to market and sell products. So that's
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that's awesome. And any other add-ons?
Yeah, and loyalty programs is another. I think the commonality between whether it's beacons or geolocation or loyalties and RFID, it's all about the anonymous fan. There's a traditional challenge in sports that if you have 20,000 seats and the average person buys 3 tickets, makes them 2s and 4s, there's a large percentage of your consumer audience that is actively engaging with your key product that you don't identify. And so it's both a combination of learning the behavioral trends and just identifying the consumers, so that way you can then have an opportunity to re-engage them through that channel or other channels the next time they're in the building.
Sure. Great. So let's we could talk here all day about this stuff because this is what we do and we love it. And but we want to see maybe if there's some questions in the audience about technology and sports venues.
Good afternoon. The kind of relationship you have with the telcos and the Wi-Fi operators, because the audience would be streaming, uploading, and of course there are also limitations because they're also watching at the same time. So is there a kind of best practice there in terms of number of people uploading and the kind of bandwidth you need?
I'll just comment.
Why don't you take that one first?
I'll just comment that I don't know if you saw the statistics from the Super Bowl, but there was a significant amount of data, terabytes of data. I think it was like 26 or 28 terabytes during the Super Bowl, so that that kind of set a record, but it sets the bar, and so it requires a very close working relationship with the carriers for them to be able to anticipate the additional load. And we're seeing some venues now go to more neutral host network infrastructures, working with the carriers where the venue itself installs that infrastructure that supports all that the cell signal coverage with distributed antenna systems. And then the carriers will pay back and pay rental fees to have access to that network infrastructure. So those are some of the new models that we're now seeing with these venues. That gives the venue owner and operator more control of the environment to deliver that high capacity coverage that's going to be needed today and in the future.
It's also a huge element. So there's beyond the actual stadium operation, the technology staff, and the providers, whether it's cellular or Wi-Fi. There's also the partnership marketing team that wants to have an active hand in this, because if you want to associate with your Verizon or AT&T, you want to associate your brand to the property. The teams want to be able to rely on those partners to help provide that infrastructure, but those brands, there's also a dollar value associated to how you can connect that back to the team, drive Verizon subscribers, driving, whether it's like AT&T and their massive technology relationship with Cowboy Stadium. So it's in everyone's best interest for those providers to invest and make sure they're maximizing the value of that strategic partnership with the team, as well as delivering to the fan experience.
Any other questions?
Yes, so I would say that just based on my research on football and how it became televised, it's been 50 years of NFL calling the shots, and then the legitimacy of the NCAA is in part because the NFL said, we'll take Sunday, you'll take Saturday. Do you think it's just going to be technology that's going to disrupt the way we watch football? Or is there going to be some type of political aspect that has to be overcome first before technology can say, everyone can watch this on their iPad?
You want to take that one? Well, that's a great question. So I think it's going to be the fans themselves that are going to create the movement. It ties back to the topic we talked about before with the self-content production. And so that's really going to, I believe, drive the way the events are broadcasted and consumed by the fan base.
listen, the NFL definitely has the most power when it comes to sports content and traditional delivery systems. I mean, 120 million people watched Super Bowl again this year. There were some streaming options, but TV still dominates. Every other network show in the world is going less and less ratings. The NFL still seems to be trending up. And sports in general, live content, things that are, that have that additional protection against DVRing or cord cutting and the experience of watching it live is going to keep a lot of power in their hands. But the way people choose to consume that content will ultimately have the biggest shift. So whether it's cord cutting and over-the-top services, ESPN, I think, has gone back and forth countless times about what their over-the-top strategy is, considering how much they as a media company rely on the subscription, the value of the subscribers through traditional cable and satellite. So the more the consumer changes the behavior and the way they consume content, ultimately they'll have to adjust. And I don't think it's going to change the power that they have in terms of the value of the content itself, but will change the relationship between the content and the distributors.
Comcast only lost 36,000 subscribers last year, so I subscribed for cable just to watch football on Sundays. So I don't know, just based on my own experience, I don't see another way to consume it. You mentioned Periscope. How much have they been able to crack down on saying absolutely you can't broadcast this from your seat?
They do a lot. In the venues, they do a lot. Those channels are also partnering, like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and they have partnerships with the league properties as well. So if they're doing things that are in violation of their channel partnership with the leagues, they're acting on their behalf to help shut those and block those channels down and pull content down. YouTube does it all the time. Like it's a typical part of the business. You're right. Cord cutting is still much more a fear than a huge trend. There's subtle trends to it, but it's also, to your point, a lot of people don't do it purely because of the value of that live content, which in turn is what's justifying the rights fees and keeping that relationship going. So, I think it's a slow burn. I don't expect a rapid change in the next 12 to 24 months. But it's something everyone, if they don't plan for it, and they can give you for a rude awakening a couple years from now.
So obviously, talking data and analytics are big right now. So where do you see the future of sports gambling and fantasy sports?
I mean, that's a tough question right now. Lots of lobbying going on. I've been a fantasy sport player for almost 3 decades, and the digitalization of the sport. A lot of daily fantasy sports has given the industry a fresh breath of air. Mark Hughes invested in daily fantasy sport coming in. At the same time, the political agenda, the taxes, the revenues, all those things I think are barriers that we need to overcome. And in terms of the analytics, the big data, football was the first one to really get into that, and now you're seeing the rest of the sports catch up in a big way. I think at the IBM general session, I talked about the indoor biking and having the data in real time, and the lenses, and your heart rate, your temperature, the wind gauge. So all those things I think are attributed to evidence in the data.
And daily fantasy sports is really interesting. I mean, the leagues were so head over heels to get involved for the marketing revenue. I mean, spending crazy amounts of money in terms of partnerships. But now you see a couple of leagues that are now, let's opt out of this deal, let's opt out of this exclusivity, as more and more states are jumping in and trying to legislate away the loophole that DFS was able to kind of sneak their way into. If you talk to, I love Adam Silver. To me, he's probably one of the most business savvy people in the industry, and he'll talk openly like gambling is coming. Like it's an accepted norm outside of the United States for other European and international sports leagues. It's going to make its way into the United States. This power and regulation versus, I mean, there was something like $4 billion wagered illegally on the Super Bowl in the United States alone. I might have that number wrong. So you can't just bury your head in the sand and say it doesn't exist. So it's another top thing that the leagues need to kind of overcome their fear of, and it's better to be an active participant in it. Same thing happened with social media. When social media first came out, teams were afraid of it. I talked to a person on a team and said, no, we can't be on social media because someone might say something bad about the team. now it's an accepted norm. You have to be engaging and help control the conversation in order to help direct the outcome. It's going to be the same thing when it comes to gambling, daily fantasy sports, etc. So it's something I think it's heading that way.
Speaking of analytics and player performance, at the venue here we have a booth around Watson and personality profiling and analytics, and we're seeing teams now actually doing personality and profiling on the players' mental health and some of their decision-making capability. So it goes beyond just their physical health and well-being. In fact, some of the sports teams that I've talked to place more emphasis now on those mental attributes than they do physical attributes, because most of our players have the physical attributes. It's just a matter of which ones have the right mental attributes to make the difference.
So kind of to that, are you hearing any discussion or concerns around how technology can enable an unfair advantage for teams? And I'm not talking just about a broken headset during a football game, but actually capturing plays real time, getting it to players real time. I know I'm from Kansas City. When Sporting Kansas City built their field, it was the first stadium. It was Sporting Kansas City. Woo! Thank you. Also Royals, which champions. Thank you. Kansas City is the place to be, in case you can guess. But anyway, back to unfair advantage. They had cameras in the stadium and was giving, during halftime, video to their team, but not necessarily the visiting teams, and created like that. So I'm assuming that may be happening in other sports, and this technology becomes more prevalent, and new creative ways are being used.
Well, I've heard that they're going to put sensors in the balls now so they can tell if they're over or under inflated. But that's IoT.
What's the phrase? If you're not cheating, you're not trying. Like, this is not a new technology. Is exacerbating the ways you can try to game the system, but it doesn't actually change the fundamental of whether a team will or won't try. I mean, there's a baseball team I won't name that when there's a team that puts a hill in their outfield that their players know how to navigate better than other teams. That gives them an advantage. There's one team that put a little grass path between the pitcher and home plate, which was untraditional because they happen to have very fast players. They wanted to bunt more to try to give themselves an advantage there. Like, there's all different ways to try the game. The leagues, the biggest job the leagues have is trying to control that and create that playing field. That's why, traditionally you never allowed to have any video content at all on the sidelines. Everyone was a lot of static pictures because, there's an even playing field here. No one is going to have better or worse quality video or different angles or access to different systems. You take a picture, you can look at your pictures. And, last year, 2 years ago, the NFL allowed surfaces for use on the sideline. That was a big deal. That's a very traditional, league. They wanted to avoid that, but now they're talking about maybe we'll have some form of league-dictated video feeds available to both teams, but the league's going to control it and make sure if they're making changes that one team has a problem, the other team can't access it either. Yes, it creates more opportunities for finding a loophole or an advantage, but the league is just as active, the leagues in general are just as active in trying to squash this.
Bob, how do you see the technology playing a factor in the outcomes of some of these teams as far as player selection and player performance?
Well, I'd go back to the car racing first of all, and NASCAR this past weekend. We're really struggling right now to identify their target users. Most of these watchers are 56 years old, and the kids are just trying to watch it. So NASCAR, as I talked about fellow IBM here, is really trying to digify television. So we're seeing the dashboard with graphics on there. You're actually able to see the heart rate of the racer and the virtual reality aspect. So I think that's one way to sort of track and identify data and use that to identify.
Yeah, I was going to say, and there's a lot of things that are completely that are completely fair, where teams still have this gigantic disparities in terms of how much staff are they putting behind analytics. Some people have one quant guy in the corner that no one listens to. Some people have an army of 30 interns or 30 analysts. that's fine. There's data sources that the league provides, but then there's other data that you can acquire through your own collection for use outside of the live event. So the league's biggest thing is managing what's happening as soon as, from the first pitch to the final pitch, or kickoff to the end of the clock. But everything that goes on between the games that the teams can use data and video and analytics and technology for, it's really up to the teams to decide how much energy and staff and budget and time they're going to put into leveraging those technologies.
Questions? Anybody else? All right, you guys can keep going.
Yeah, okay. Well, so I think, virtual reality is going to be becoming play a key role in the future of sports. You mentioned a form of that by doing overlay to the TV feeds and being able to actually watch events and virtually tour the venues without actually being there. So what opportunities do you think that's going to present both the fans and the teams?
That's a good question. I really think identifying with the athlete is something that the fans want to do. So if you can go into a virtual environment and do the 40-yard dash, do the 300-pound bench press, catch balls, hit home runs the same way they do, and measure yourself against what they're doing, I think there's a tremendous opportunity in the future to really grow the sport, especially internationally now that the leagues are trying to push towards Europe, Africa, China, and really bring those fans to their fan base.
Yeah, the international is spot on. I'm sorry, go back to Adam Silver one more time, but the last MIT's Analytics Conference, he said something that was right on, that NBA is a global game, and 99% of the people that self-identify as a fan of the NBA will never see an actual NBA game live in person. So he's really interested in the potential that VR holds to create an experience similar to watching a game live that this global audience will be able to take advantage of without having to travel and whatnot. So I think that's, to me, the most interesting application of it.
Yeah.
I want to learn a little bit about the new Atlanta Stadium that IBM's working together with, and Jim's part of that. Maybe we'll touch on that a little bit.
Sure. We talked a lot about technology and the evolution of technology. The Super Bowl that recently was held with connectivity requirements. IBM is currently working with the Atlanta Falcons to help build their new stadium as their kind of technology thought leader. We're putting in place highly integrated, robust, shared infrastructure to support all their IP-enabled systems throughout the stadium. So from a trends and directions standpoint, if you think about it, a lot of these ticketing and access control and building management systems today are independently operated networks. And our approach with the Falcons and our point of view with other clients is to really create this whole shared infrastructure system that can be single, managed and controlled and provide the most degree of scalability and flexibility and operational efficiency for the clubs and organizations. So we're going to need to have that type of robust infrastructure in place to enable all these great fan experience apps, virtual reality, gamification, etc. The demand is just going to continue to go up and up and up. And so the Falcons want to create the best NFL stadium, and we're in the process of helping them doing that, both from an infrastructure standpoint and an application standpoint, and providing some of that personalized fan engagement that the fans want to be able to experience at the stadium that they can't experience at home. And so that's how we're going to get the clubs are going to get people in the stands, is to give them a unique experience there. It's kind of maybe the Disney World effect. You can't watch Disney World at home. You got to go to Disney World and experience it.
Yeah, I try to build that concept. I try to call it the Grand Canyon effect. Like, you can see the Grand Canyon on TV, but when you actually go there and see it in person, there is no substitute. That's the challenge that these properties have to have. and it's, and traditionally it's always been about the on-field product as the way you create that, but the on-field product you have less and less control over. But everything else around the on-field product, so the things that Atlanta is doing, that Texas A&M was doing, everything from the moment you leave your door in the morning to you come home at night, if you can make that entire process a memorable, positive experience, that's the only way you can overcome the ups and downs that are going to come with what's happening on the field.
Absolutely. Any other questions here?
Yeah, I think we're wrapping up in just a minute, so if anybody has one final question.
Make it a good one. No pressure.
No pressure. I think this might be more specific to John, but with all the press and info on concussions in the NFL, do you see where IBM specifically come in and help with using their IoT or analytics or Watson to kind of help the NFL kind of decrease some of those concussions and the issues that they're having around concussions?
Yeah, so we talked about IoT and putting sensors in footballs. They certainly can put sensors in helmets as well. I'm sure that they will in the future to predict, if a player has received a concussion in some way. But we can leverage Watson Health. I mean, we have a very deep level of expertise in practice and a lot of historical information data around people's health. And we can apply those health statistics and data to the player themselves and help prevent problems from happening and take players out of play if they've been potentially concussed. And so I think it's really going to serve the players well and make them more healthy ultimately during their careers and after.
The question is, have you already approached them?
Well, not that I'm aware of. We haven't approached the NFL directly yet, but I can envision those types of conversations coming in the future.
As part of the next gen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, IoT. We're going to have sensors for everything. From the footballs to the helmets. Well, in fact,
player pad sensors.
Yeah, in fact, today there's RFID tags in the shoulder pads of every NFL player, tracking them, around the field and during practice, during the games. NFL owns that, and they distribute it to fantasy football leagues and monetize that. So there's a number of different ways to use that.
I think I saw Zebra and some of the companies in different sources.
Yeah, exactly.
That's definitely they're doing a lot with them. And in fact, they're in your university working with them. It's that multi-product source set. Makes sense.
That's exactly right. Ziva has partnered with Annabelle to start doing some of this stuff. Okay, so I think that's all the time we have today. I want to thank everyone for coming out. Thank the panelists, the audience. If you guys want to learn more about what IBM is doing specifically in sports and technology, you guys can visit us at ibm.com/sports. Very easy. You don't even have to write it down. So thank you guys. Have a wonderful evening and keep in touch. Okay, come visit our website. Thank you.